So in front of you guys is a tier list with zombie maps. Crazy, I know. All these maps range from Nacht all the way to Liberty Falls on this tier list. And what I'll be doing is a tier list of every map, every zombies map, based on their atmosphere and setting. Not based on their gameplay, just based on their atmosphere, setting, basically how the map looks, sounds, and feels. I'm also measuring them on their setting, whether they feel unique, distinct, or interesting to play in. This is a very subjective list. Obviously, this is what I personally think has an interesting setting. This tier list is one that was created by John Wheeler0325. I found it on the tier maker website, and I did some modifications to the tiers themselves, renamed them to, the simple lettering. Just to go over the tiers, basically F tier. A map that's on the F tier means it's boring, it's uninteresting. A good barometer is Liberty Falls. If I were to include it on here, which I'm not, because the map hasn't come out yet, it would be in the F tier for sure. D tier maps are maps that are still boring, but have maybe a bit more going on, a bit more spice in there, but not too much. C tier is like, okay, it's like middle of the road. It's like the setting has a few interesting elements to it, like they do a few interesting things in there. It's not that boring, but sometimes it's not my cup of tea. B tier, the map has a good setting overall, good atmosphere. It doesn't wow me, it's good enough. That is that. And then the A tier has a great setting, and then S tier is like it goes above and beyond. It has a setting that's rich. It really speaks to me, really moves my soul. I'm only going to be looking at the Treyarch zombie maps here, and specifically the round-based maps. No remakes are included, aside from some of the reimagined maps like Tog or Alpha Omega or Blood of the Dead. With all that in mind, I think we can start going into it, and I'll be doing this tier list in alphabetical order with the maps. So we have to start things off with Alpha Omega. I'm going to put it in the D tier. Honestly, I just never been too impressed by the map. It's a map in Nuketown, right? And there might be a few interesting elements to it, especially maybe in the underground or bunker portion of the map. But I don't know, it's not a map that is really defined by its setting. It goes for this weird like 1950s aesthetic, but it doesn't really lean into it too much compared to, say Attack of the Radioactive Thing from Infinite Warfare Zombies, which I won't be ranking on this list. That map really leaned into the 50s aesthetic overall. Alpha Omega just doesn't really do that. It kind of has like this gray, boring tint to it. I just never really vibed with it. In terms of just the atmosphere and setting, it's not a unique setting. It's Nuketown. We've been there before. We've seen it before. So yeah, I guess D tier is fitting. On to Ancient Evil. Now, I'm someone who likes ancient Greece, antiquity, that type of aesthetic. And I think for that reason, it goes in the A tier. I think Treyarch did a phenomenal job of really creating a very atmospheric map relating to ancient Greece and Greek mythology. And I like the fact that it's very different from what we've seen throughout Zombies' history as a setting. One of the things I like about the Chaos storyline was that it was pushing the boundaries when it comes to locations and settings. We've never had a map that, really focused on ancient history and mythology before, aside from 9. Usually most maps have some combination of science fiction and maybe a bit of fantasy, but Ancient Evil is really one of those exceptions. Not a facility map, it makes it a bit more distinct. My one nitpick, the reason why it's not going to be in the S tier is because I think that the main part of the map would have looked a bit better if it was on the surface where you could see the sky. The fact that the map just doesn't have an interesting skybox, in my opinion, weighs it down a bit. Like, you can keep the underworld section underground, that would have been fine. But yeah, that is my one nitpick. Anyways, let's move on to Ascension. Ascension unfortunately goes into the D tier. I've really just never been that impressed by the setting. Really, it's not a unique setting in Black Ops 1, just because the Soviet Cosmodrome, the setting, the location, is something we saw in the campaign, and we also saw it in the multiplayer. And I just don't really think they do anything special with the theme of the map. Like, it goes for that space race vibe, but, I think Moon does it a bit better, in my opinion. That's part of the same, and it's part of the same game. On top of that, when I think of the map, I just think of the color gray. Like, everything is just gray. It's also not that scary or creepy. There's nothing really going on. There's only like a few things that I like, such as the monkey rounds, where the map looks a bit more interesting visually, and then you have the rocket ship which you can launch into the sky, but that happens momentarily. Outside of that, I can't really think of much, so it's just not that compelling. So for Blood of the Dead, I have to I'm gonna put it in B tier, and the reason why I'm putting it in B tier is because, you know, compared to the original, I prefer the original's setting and aesthetic. Even though they're in the same location, I think Mob of the Dead has a bit more subtlety to it, and I prefer the tone, the mobster theme, and the feeling of isolation that you don't really get in Blood of the Dead. Blood of the Dead is a bit over the top, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. You know, some of the maps I'm going to rank higher can be viewed as over the top, right? But in Blood of the Dead, like, they really lean into the hellish aesthetic, especially with things like the pits of lava you see right before you enter the prison, the catwalk, and those are cool areas to look at. But I don't know, if I'm ranking and I'm comparing it to the other maps, I just don't get that same feel, and I think it's really challenging for Blood of the Dead to really set itself apart from the original, because Mob of the Dead just had such a strong and concise theme to it. So I don't know, Blood of the Dead to me feels fitting at the B tier. Then we have Buried. Buried will go in the A tier, and to be honest, I might put it above Ancient Evil. It's kind of similar to Ancient Evil in a way, where, you know, it's kind of the Wild West version of it, because they're both maps that take place underground in these lost cities or towns. But I prefer Buried's take because I get more variety of tones out of it. There's a bit of goofiness and color with things like Arthur and some of the locations in it. But at the same time, it can also be a bit creepy, especially the Ghost Mansion. Like, I don't know, for me, I've always been a bit creeped out by that area, in a good way, because even when you're going just like right by it, you can hear the ghosts in the background. You can even see them pop in and out of the windows of the mansion. And if you're playing co-op, you know, sometimes some jump scares can happen. Let me just tell you that. But that has to do more with the gameplay side of things. I like the fact that I can be creeped out, but then also have like a goofy tone at the same time. So all of that in one map is nice. And plus, I like Wild West genres, like in TV, film, video games, so maybe I'm just a bit biased putting it this high. Next is Call of the Dead. So I should mention this, I like me some snowy maps. There's going to be a common theme for most of these snowy maps. They're going to rank pretty high on this list, at least in the upper half. And Call of the Dead, you know, is a snowy map. So, you know, bare minimum, it gets B tier. The reason why it's not going any higher is George Romero, to be honest. And it's mostly because he constantly is screaming on the map. It's pretty annoying. People complain about the fog on the map and, you know, how it rolls in, but I don't mind it from a visual standpoint, and I think it kind of adds to the whole snowstorm aspect to it, because, you know, you're in Siberia, you know, so you would expect the map to feel cold, and I think they did a good job capturing that. So visually, I think it's a great map, but I guess sonically, Romero kind of weighs it down, in my opinion. It's really irritating. It's more irritating than shooting him and having him chase after you, honestly. So B tier it is. So Dead of the Night, I'm going to put it in the C tier. I get what it's going for, and I can appreciate how it's trying to lean into like early 20th century horror, like, you know, vampires and werewolves. Basically has the trifecta of horror enemies when you think about it. The werewolves, the vampires, the zombies, all in one map. That's pretty impressive, but at the same time, like, it's just not my cup of tea. It's, you know, it's not bad or anything. It's just, it's not like the Wild West or Ancient Greece, you know, things that you kind of more gravitated towards from an aesthetics point of view. And there are definitely parts of the map that are well executed. Like the starting room area is really nice, which is basically the central part of the map. And there's also a bit of horror in there, like with Nosferatu, or at least, but that has to do more with gameplay, so I don't know. C tier, I think, is a good place, though. Moving on, we have Der Eisendrache, or Drache. Forget the pronunciation. I'm gonna put it in the S tier. It's weird to say, but it has like this weird, like, ambient, soothing tone and feel to it. You know, the music, the sound of the map is like very low key. You also have the snow, which again, I'm kind of a sucker for, just like with medieval castles. So S tier, I think, is proper. Now for Der Riese, honestly, I'm gonna put it in the A tier, but it's gonna be a strong A. If this was the Giant, I would actually put it in the S tier, to be honest, and maybe it's because of the snow, let's be real. It's hard to really explain with Der Riese. I think it's impressive how they took like a small to medium sized map and they make it feel big. You have the buildings all around the map that are just towering over you. You also have things like the teleporters and the pack-a-punch machine, which just feel very grand. The fact that the map takes place during an eclipse is also a really cool touch to it, and it also has like this cool factory vibe, factory facility vibe. And I'm not the biggest fan of facility maps all the time. I think it can get a bit too formulaic, but I think they struck a nice balance. Next up is Die Maschine. This one is going in the D tier. I don't really have to explain much about this map. Like, you know, there's some snow to it. I like snowy maps, as I said, but, you know, outside of that, if you ask me to describe the map, it's basically the Nacht bunker with a facility underneath, and the facility isn't just that interesting in my opinion. So, you know, it's kind of on the cusp of being an F tier, to be honest, but the snow kind of saves it a bit. And there's also Dark Ether mode, which only happens temporarily. You'll only be in there momentarily, so it doesn't last that long, which is unfortunate. That would have made the map a lot more interesting. Moving on, we have Die Rise. Die Rise, I'm gonna put B tier. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of B tier for now. I like how there's a lot of variety in the map. There's a lot of locations that feel distinct from one another. So, you know, the upper areas from the rooftop section is very bright. It's very vibrant. You have a really nice skybox, personally one of my favorites in Zombies history. And then the deeper you go, it gets a bit darker. You get into the sweatshops, or you get into the areas like the mall area. And some of those areas are not as interesting, but, you know, at the same time, I can appreciate the variety. And there's a lot of like interesting design choices they make. I remember Treyarch talking about how they were inspired by MC Escher before the map came out, and you could really see that with some of the rooms, like the upside down Buddha room. They make the map from a visual standpoint interesting. But then I think about, you know, things like the sound, for example, and there's not a whole lot that stands out. You know, it's not a cinematic map. So whatever the case, I think B tier is warranted. Next, we have Firebase Z. I'm probably going to put Firebase in the C tier. I'm not wild by the location of the map. It's basically a military base. Okay, cool. That's such a cool location, right? That's most of the map. There are some cool areas, like, you know, right by where you fight off Orda. That gives off like trench areas. That gives off some of that Vietnam War vibes, feels, you know, not like I was deployed in that war or anything like that. Let's be real. The town area is also a bit cool. I like it. I also like the map's color palette. It's a bit colorful, a bit vibrant. It has a nice sunset vibe to it, basically. But aside from that, it's kind of a basic location. Don't really have too much else to say about it. 5 is up next. 5 is pretty unique because it's split into 3 different sections. Each section has a very different look, aesthetic, even tone. The first section is more like what you expect from Washington, D.C., bureaucracy, you know, office buildings, stuff like that. The second section is the war room, which has a lot of like those blue and orange lighting and colors. It's more intense in there. And then you have the laboratory section, which is supposed to be a bit creepier. There's a bit more detail going on, but I just don't get any strong reactions from any of the sections from 5, to be honest. So for that reason, it's not going to be ranked too highly, but at the same time, it does add some variety, so maybe C tier, and I'll put it above Firebase Z. Okay, so Forsaken, should it be D tier, should it be F tier? That's what I'm really thinking about right now. It's not a unique location. We see it already in the campaign and multiplayer. It doesn't really have a strong theme. It's supposed to be like a Soviet conception of 1950s American town, or suburbia, whatever you want to call it, but I feel like we've already seen that before. You know, we've seen it with Nuketown, we've seen it with Alpha Omega. I'm going to give it an F tier. Like, I just never vibed with this map at all. It just doesn't have anything that distinct to me. It has a location where, you know, we've seen it before. Nothing about it really stands out, to be honest. So F tier, I think, is not bad. Gorod Krovi is going to go in the A tier, and it's probably going to go high A tier. So Gorod does a lot. There's a lot going on. There's dragons, there's androids, there's manglers, there's a giant robot that's toppled over in the background. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It has this cross-section between fantasy and science fiction. And meanwhile, it's set in Stalingrad, war-torn style Stalingrad. And you can hear the artillery fire in the background. There's a lot going on. It has a bright, vibrant color palette, which, as you know, I like in maps. The only thing is that, like, a lot of the buildings in the map are destroyed. They're not, like, super distinct. I can't really think of too many distinct areas in the map, aside from the big central, I think, capital building that you can enter, and it's where one of the dragon stations are. Aside of that, I can't think of much. I think having it in A tier is fair. I really like the sounds, the general visuals, especially what's going on around you, and it also does a good job of making you feel immersed within the map, so it deserves a strong rating. Next is 9, and this just might go in S tier. I'm really trying to think of any of the downsides or flaws to the map. So, you know, with just like Ancient Evil, it's a very different setting. It's a Roman Colosseum. So, you know, or at least it's a Roman-inspired Colosseum. I don't know too much about the Chaos storyline, the in-depths of it, whether or not it's actually a proper Roman Colosseum. But it's something we've never really seen before in a zombies map. It's a simple zombies map when it comes to the design, but when it comes to the setting, again, it's one of those maps that's very immersive. You can hear the crowd around you reacting to your performances, especially in the center of the map. It's also very bright, it's very colorful, and then you have those 4 temples that feel very distinct from one another. They did a good job of making each temple feel like it's representative of the god and its cultural background, at least from an aesthetic point of view. And there's also the underground section, the underground area, which is also a really nice contrast from the bright, colorful surface of the map. And then you have other elements like the fire that pops up, or the announcer. All of those things just add to the map, so I think I put it in a good spot with S tier. So Kino is going to get A tier. I'm always been creeped out or a bit scared by the map. Maybe not as much as I was when I was a little kid, when I first started playing zombies. I used to get nightmares from the map, honestly. Especially the stage area, which is like really dark, really decrepit. I really like the theme it's going for. This dark, abandoned theater from World War II in sort of the modern day, or at least 1960s, many years after World War II. So it does a really great job at feeling dark and creepy. And then you have areas like the alleyway, which serve as like a nice contrast from the rest of the map. You know, every time you enter the alleyway, it feels like you're taking a breath of fresh air, because it's very different from the rest of the map visually. So for Mauer, I gotta put it in that D tier slot. Nothing really strikes me as interesting about the setting. I just feel like the setting was a bit wasted potential. They really could have done a better job with the whole East versus West Berlin side of things, where each half could have felt very different from one another from the perspective of the atmosphere and the aesthetic. It's also a map straight from the campaign too, and I actually prefer the atmosphere they built in the campaign mission a bit more compared to Mauer, where it's just like you're playing in these empty apartment buildings in the background. Like, I don't know, there isn't anything compelling about it for me. Like, not that much. There's maybe a few interesting elements here and there, like that flaming subway underground. Outside of that, I think D tier is fitting. Okay, so I have to put Mob of the Dead S. And for that matter, it's gonna go in the top of S. Mob's atmosphere is so rich, and it did so much for the zombies mode. Before Mob of the Dead, zombies just didn't really feel that cinematic. But you know, with Mob of the Dead's development being done by the campaign team, and it was under Jason Blundell from what I remember, they took a location that's already interesting, already has history with Alcatraz, and just added so much detail to it, added a rich atmosphere that is really enhanced by the music, sounds, the visuals, by just the overall tone of the map and the feeling of isolation that Alcatraz, the actual island, the actual location, ultimately is. And it goes for that horror feel too, which I really like, and it's something that is just kind of a bit lost in Blood of the Dead. From all the details of the hanging bodies and the wall, the candle on the ground, the fire all around, it's not like as over the top as Blood of the Dead, which I prefer not to be too over the top, but it's still a bit horrifying. Like, I'm not scared by Mob of the Dead, but it does give you some horrifying visuals. It's definitely a trailblazer because this was the first map to have map unique round transition music. This was the first map to experiment with the HUD. Like, this was the first map to have a map unique heads up display. So there's a lot of things you can really credit Mob of the Dead for, and I definitely think S tier is very, very much deserving. Okay, so Moon, it's the moon, right? Like, a map on the moon. You know, crazy unique location. Even Area 51 is a cool little location that you have. And I do like the overall vibe of the map. Like, it feels like a map on the moon, you know? Like, I think they do a good job capturing that cold, dark, empty environment. And like, when you think of the moon, you probably think of those characteristics. And it also has a futuristic vibe to it with, like, futuristic looking facility, those sliding doors. And at the same time, like, the Chronicles version, I think, makes the original version look very empty with its details. Take, for example, the laboratory area. The original isn't really well detailed, but in the Chronicles version, they add a lot more to it. And then take the biolab area, where in the original, it's so dark in there, you could barely see any of the trees and vegetation. But in Chronicles, you can definitely see it. So I don't know, like, I think I have to put Moon in the A tier. Like, being on the moon, you know, it's, yeah, like, I can't discredit that, right? It just weighs too much in my opinion. So yeah, I have to put it above Kino, or actually, you know what, I'm gonna keep it there. I think bottom of A tier for now is fine by me for now. Next is Nacht, the first ever zombies map, and this one is an easy B tier. There isn't a whole lot going on with the map, it's very basic, but at the same time, for such a small map, I think Treyarch did a good job setting the tone. You play the original version back in World at War, and the zombies in that map, they sound like animals, they sound like hounds that are spawning in. But there isn't a whole lot going on at the same time. Like, there isn't a whole lot of variety of different areas that look different and have their own unique aesthetic. But it's still consistent in the sense that it's a dark, spooky map. It's set during the middle of the night. The zombies, it sets the tone for what the zombies is at the very least early on in its history. So I think they nailed it. Nuketown Zombies is going to go C tier. And in my opinion, it does a better job than Alpha Omega in capturing the spirit of Nuketown. It shows a nice contrast between the original version, which is bright, colorful, and the Nuketown Zombies version, which is dark and dreary and kind of post-apocalyptic because it takes place after the nuke goes off in the map. And you also have things like some nice ambient noises and some details in the background as you're playing. Like, I think you can see some fire tornadoes, like some small ones. And then you also have the giant mushroom cloud in the background. These details are really cool. But again, is it the most appealing map in the world? Not really. Like, it's not that cinematic. And still, it's a smaller map, so there aren't a whole lot of variety of different locations. So, in my opinion, I think C tier is fitting. For me, Origins is going to go in the S tier, and honestly, I'm going to put it above Mob of the Dead. I think it's a bit better with its atmosphere. there's just so much going on in a good way on the map. We have to kind of go back to Black Ops 2 Zombies real quick. Like back in that time where you had Black Ops 1's finale of Moon, which was such a big finale, when Black Ops 2 Zombies was nearing its end, there was this feeling of like, what other location can they do that would top Moon, that would top the last finale basically. And somehow Treyarch found a way by setting the map in the middle of a World War I battlefield, but this weird alternate type history where there's giant robots walking around and you have Panzer Soldats coming at you and the noise. And then you look at the skybox, you're seeing like these dogfights happening in the sky, and there's also the dynamic weather too, and there's snow. Obviously, just add those elements together, there's just a whole bunch, there's so many diverse locations in there. You have the crazy place, you have the underground areas too. There's just so much in Origins that I absolutely love. And the soundtrack too, that music that plays when you ride the tank is just so anthemic. I don't know what adjectives to use, but you definitely get the Blundell influence, the campaign influence on this map with these songs that sound grand in the background. So Revelations is a tough one to really judge because, you know, it's a map. It's a collage map, I should say. It takes so many different parts of older maps and then combines it into one. It has a beautiful skybox, and I do like some of the details where if you're in one location, like if you're in the Origins location, you'll hear the music from the map as you're playing. Same thing if you're in the Mob of the Dead location, etc., etc. The map itself has a lot of bright colors going on. It's very vibrant. You have the inside of the Apothecon Servant too, which is the new one of the new areas in the map, and I kind of like its aesthetic. It's kind of like Die Rise, where it doesn't have a strong, unique theme aside from being that collage map, but it's still very visually appealing in a lot of areas, and I think it's more visually appealing than Die Rise. So I'm gonna put it in the A tier, and it may be above Moon and Kino, but there are certain things keeping it from reaching that old-time S tier. Shadows of Evil is going to go in that S tier slot, and where in S tier? I mean, probably behind Origins. I think they did a really good job just capturing Morgue City and what it is. Obviously not a real city, but it is kind of based off of Chicago. You have the city lights, you have the bright colors, you have the music they have. They did a fantastic job really capturing the 1940s vibe. They even had some cool details with the HUD, where the perk icons in Shadows of Evil are very different to the other maps in the game, and even the perks themselves have their own unique jingles on this map, stylized around the jazz instrumentation of the 1940s. So Treyarch went all out with Shadows of Evil, and you can really tell they put a lot of effort into it. And it's definitely the high bar when it comes to Zombies atmosphere and what we expect out of it. Then we have Shangri-La, which is going to go in the S tier, and I'll say this, I'm liking all these S's we're having right now. You know, it's kind of a streak we're going on. So Shangri-La is known for being a very colorful, vibrant map. It always gives me those theme park vibes to it, where you have things like the minecarts, the geysers. You have a water slide on the map. I mean, it has everything you would expect from a theme park, honestly. It also does a good job of capturing the idea of like being in a paradise, a tropical paradise, but also goes for that like temple theme you would see from something like Indiana Jones. And there's a nice contrast with the underground portion, which is a bit darker, which it kind of reminds me of 9 in a way. So, look, I love Shangri-La, absolutely, and a big part of it is just the look of the map, so I have to put it in the S tier. For Shi No Numa, I've never really been a big fan. Honestly, it might go in the D tier. I've just never really been creeped out by the map. I've never been spooked by the map. A lot of the map just looks and feels the same to me. You basically have just one big hut surrounded by 4 smaller huts that is visually not very diverse. So I don't know, like, when the Hellhounds spawn in, it's kind of like Ascension, where you have the overall atmosphere improving. But outside of that, the best way I can really describe it is that it kind of reminds me of a rainy Tuesday morning where you have to go to work or school. It's like dreary outside. I don't know, like, it's not a feeling where you want to be awakened, you want to go back to sleep. It's that type of vibes to me. Every time I reach round 20, I just feel like quitting because the atmosphere is just so boring to me. I could understand if other people disagree and feel like Shi No Numa is creepy. It's set in a swamp, right? You hear like the noises in the jungle, stuff like that. But I don't know. I just never got anything out of it, honestly. There are some like small, cool little things on the map, like the meteorite, the 115 meteorite outside, or you have Peter McCain's body hanging in the starting room. Those are some cool elements, but overall, if the atmosphere, if the look of the map is preventing me from actually really playing to higher rounds, then I don't know, honestly. And it has like this yellow beige tint to it, which I don't really like either. So anyways, Shi No Numa, D tier. I'm firm on that. Nacht Der Toten is going to go in the B tier, and you know what? I'll put it above Die Rise. I was thinking of maybe putting it side by side by Call of the Dead, but I feel like that would just be a bit too on the nose. Nacht is just very different from Call of the Dead visually. It's the same location, but it's a lot brighter. It takes place during the daytime, and it kind of gives off those like late winter vibes with all the snow kind of melting a bit. Also, there's no George Romero, so you don't really hear those noises, of course, which is a bit better, but it's not as atmospheric compared to its predecessor, so that's why it's a bit lower, just still on the same tier. Now the Archon. I bet a lot of people forgot about this map already, because honestly, who thinks about Vanguard zombies that much nowadays? To be honest, not me, and I don't blame anyone who doesn't. The Archon is going in the F tier, and it just really isn't anything interesting about it. It says that it's like somewhere in North Africa. It gives off like a desert environment, which is unique for Treyarch zombies. So I'll give it that. But other than that, it just has like this ugly tint to it, and there just isn't a whole lot going on. Like the map feels very empty, lacking in detail. So bottom of the tiers, it goes. Tranzit, I'm going to put in the high B tier. One of the few times I'll actually compliment Tranzit. Not a big fan of the actual map, but I think they do a good job with the overall tone and setting. I'm not a big fan of like the fogginess around the map. Not just from like a gameplay side of things, but also just visually. But I think it does a really good job at being and feeling like a post-apocalyptic hellhole that Treyarch was definitely intending on when they were creating it. It's a shame that just a large portion of the map is just completely empty and just covered in fog with no real detail to it. So, the more I think about it, I mean, I'm going to put it a bit lower. I'm still going to put it in the B tier. But, I'm going to put it in... I'm going to put it below Die Rise. So it's not consistently well detailed, but there are certain elements I do like about the map. Like when you turn on power, you have the lightning storm, and I think it's really cool detail, and also how it impacts the gameplay and how you can prevent the Avogadro from spawning. Also, I think the ambience of the map is really nice. Like it has this ambient noise to it. I can't really explain, but it feels like you're in hell a lot of times. And I think the points of interest that you have are well detailed, aside from maybe the farm area, which is just kind of boring. It's kind of dark. The diner area, the town area especially, and even the power station are interesting areas to explore. So B tier it is. So I really like Verruckt's atmosphere for sure. I think they did a really good job with making the map feel scary, creepy, whatever you want to call it. Obviously the gameplay side of things, which I'm not looking into, but I do have to credit, the super sprinters in the World at War version makes the map feel very intense. But I think that's the overall look, aesthetic, and vibes of the map on its own does contribute to it a lot. A lot of it has to do with the setting. It's set in an insane asylum, and I've always found asylums to be a great setting for horror, whether it's a game, movie, whatever it is. I also like the visuals of the map. There's blood on the walls, there's fire in the forest in the background. I think they did a really good job at making this map feel both intense and also just really like eerie, maybe is the right thing to say. And then also just the sounds you hear around the map. You hear like these ghostly haunting voices and sounds. And if you go up to certain places like the dentist chair, you hear this someone screaming. It gives you like some backstory to the setting without saying much. Like, you know, something freaky, something gnarly happened on that chair, and it's like, okay, get me out of here, get me out of this place. And I do have to commend Treyarch for turning a map set in the daytime, making it feel very scary. You know, I feel like nighttime maps, or just nighttime settings in general, are easier to convey that. So doing it in the daytime is more of a challenge, and I think Treyarch did a really good job at making a map that I feel like the community would argue is the scariest map in Zombies history. Next up is Voyage of Despair, and I'm going to put in the C tier. Sometimes I feel like I'm just playing on a boat. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing on the Titanic. Those are really the vibes I get when I'm playing this map. To be honest, I think it's hard to really convey the idea that you're on the Titanic without maybe having a few icebergs here and there. They couldn't really do much with the setting. Like, sure, they show the boat maybe sinking in a bit, but other than that, like, I don't know. It would have been a lot more gnarly, probably harder to pull off, but it'd be a lot more, you know, crazy if they had the map frozen in time with the Titanic, like, split in half like you see in the movies, and I think it happened in real life too. Not a huge Titanic expert myself, honestly, but I feel like that would have been a pretty cool setting, and just, like, could have played around with that a whole lot more. Just really leaning into the whole Titanic aspect of it, because it's like, okay, I feel like I'm just on like a ship that's like sinking slightly. That's it. And visually, I don't know, there isn't just much that pops out. Maybe somewhere in the interior of the map, you know, where the staircase is at, that's where the map looks best in my opinion. But yeah, C tier, I think, you know, middle of the road type map, it's fine by me. And the final map I'll be ranking is Zetsubou No Shima, and this one also goes in the C tier. I think it improves on Shi No Numa. I've always seen Zetsubou as like a spiritual successor in a lot of ways. You know, it kind of has that swampy, marshy environment, but they do more with it. There's more different environments going on. There's more variety going on with the locations. You have the bunker, you have like the spider area of the map. You have like all these spores scattered around, adding some color, some pop to it. I'm just not like a really big fan of like the overcast, like, gray vibe to it. And again, like, it's not that scary to me. I don't have arachnophobia, so, you know, I've never found this map scary in any real way. But at the same time, I do like how they're able to blend a bit of that, like, temple aesthetic with like a facility, which again adds more variety to the aesthetic of the map. So that's that. And to wrap things up, I really like this tier list. Obviously, I don't expect everybody or anybody to agree with my rankings, because I mean, there's so many maps, they can go in so many different orders depending on the person's opinion. Whatever the case, this is just my opinion. I think all the maps are sorted in the right category, especially with I'm really confident with the S tier. I just think those maps really stand out of being environmentally rich, having interesting settings, popping out at you with the colors and all of that jazz. So if you enjoyed this, I mean, leave it a comment or maybe even a like, and anyways, I'll be back next time.